to get things started, I'm gonna show a clip from a documentary about the New York Times, and so our first topic will be newspapers, and then we will have Professor Shane Miller of Communications and Ellen Newkirk talk about the role that newspapers play in shaping our perceptions of political and public policy issues. All right, so I'll get it started.
Oh, there we go. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. And when I talked to Alex about putting this together, he assured me to be very informal and not go into lecture mode. So I will try to do that. The newspaper industry has been constantly changing ever since its inception. And the reason I wanted to start with that is because before we start talking about the demise of newspapers and the demise of political reporting, it's important to recognize that political reporting, as we think of it, is something that has changed drastically almost every decade. In the middle of the 20th century, so the 1950s, 1960s, the newspapers enjoyed being the only significant game in town. When CBS News came on and started their news department in the 50s and really took off in the 60s, they were more of an alternative rather than a challenge to where people went to get the news. We've only started talking about the demise of newspapers in the last 2 decades, really, and even then it's been mostly in the last 10 years. Newspapers have played a pivotal role in informing the electorate about what's going on in politics. That was recognized since the inception of the country. The first thing the founders did after creating a constitution, keep in mind, was to assign 10 additional amendments, the Bill of Rights, the first of which assured the freedom of the press and the freedom that we take for granted through that. So the idea behind that was that you would have an informed electorate, that people would have multiple newspapers covering multiple perspectives. But at that point in time, the newspapers were partisan. So you would go to the Whig newspaper and you would plan on getting a story that would blast the Democrats. Or you would go to the Democratic Party and you knew you could count on reading a story about how miserable those Whigs were. The idea of objectivity, of neutrality in the news really emerged in only about the last 60, 70 years. And that's become the standard we're used to today, right? We expect our news to be very different from the editorial content in the newspaper. I'm not going to say much more about the newspapers right now, other than just to make one observation. The impact on the news, of the newspaper industry, on Americans' knowledge about politics and how they vote has been something that journalism professors have studied for a very long time. One of the longest standing strains of research has been called agenda theory, agenda setting theory. And that was developed back in the 1970s, and it can be summed up with a little colloquial expression. The media doesn't tell you what to think, but they tell you what to think about. And that line of research has stood the test of time for about the last 40 years. We know now that the media's strength lies not in what necessarily spin they put on a story or the story that they tell, as much as the stories that they tend to cover in the first place, that those create a national conversation, a national dialogue. And to that point, newspapers still play a pivotal role. The New York Times, as the newspaper of record, still plays probably the pivotal role in deciding what the stories are that lead the news and hence developing that national conversation we have about politics. I'll hand off now.
Thank you. Okay, well, as you heard, my name is Ellen Newkirk, and I am the op-ed editor for the Record this year, opinion editorial. So I guess my section is a little bit different than some, as Professor Miller said, just because it is all people's opinions, so it's just a little bit different. But I was asked to talk a little bit about the future of newspapers. And obviously, I am not an expert on this, but I'm just going to kind of give you some of my feelings about it as someone who potentially might be interested in a journalism career. And actually, we just had our first editing session of the Record last night, and we're there till 4 in the morning, so journalism is kind of fresh on my mind at the moment. Okay, so I think that the lines between public relations and journalism are kind of becoming increasingly hard to decipher, so the need for objective journalism is higher than ever. And our own personal opinions from experiences are good, but, the basic function of journalism is keeping the community informed and educated so they can be engaged citizens. And this is just kind of interesting because a lot of people today think, or are posting online and social media and things, which Heather will talk about, but I think there's still something to say that right now we're in a need for like really fair, balanced journalism, and that's kind of decreasing. So that's kind of one feeling. That's why I'm interested in journalism, is because I really think that we need to kind of step it up and just, it doesn't have to be like incredibly hard-hitting news, but it should still be fair, accurate, and balanced. Oh, thank you. And some people are also okay with the decrease in hard-hitting journalism because it means more sensitized, like celebrity news, and that's just not real life. I kind of equate it to like The Bachelor on TV, and a lot of my friends love that show, but I don't know if they realize it's not real life. So many people see journalism as a dying industry, but I just think it's more of a changing one, and people in the field just kind of need to be more increasingly creative, and that's kind of a segue, I guess, into social media, because you can still have, fair, accurate, hard-hitting journalism in social media aspects, which are sometimes more relevant to people, especially our age, who just need like the quick, up-to-the-minute updates and aren't going to spend the time reading a print newspaper. So I guess I can hand it off to Heather.
Hi everyone, my name is Heather. I am studying English and I'm a junior here at St. Ben's, and I am here because I interned with Minnesota Public Radio last summer. So totally different medium. I worked with radio, not print at all, and I learned a couple things about the changing world of journalism. With radio, I don't think it's been hit as hard as paper has, just because I feel as if radio, if you're listening in, you're pretty loyal to listening every morning or on your lunch break or in the car, so it's a little easier to access because you're doing it whenever it's convenient for you anyway. But what I learned from my experience there is that, like Ellen said, people are getting their news from not sitting down at a table and reading the newspaper every morning or sitting in the car and like listening for 2 hours at a time, but rather getting bits and pieces of the news when they can, whether it's on their phone, on the link. I mean, think about where you get your news. Is it like scrolling down your Twitter when you're in your link seat, or is it like making sure you read in the New York Times for an hour at breakfast every morning? So we would have brown bag lunches at NPR where the company would come together and bring their lunch and talk about new ideas regarding how to get the news out to listeners. And the social media department, especially at NPR in St. Paul, has just like completely blown up. They've added staff members. There's someone on the hour updating their Twitter every hour or so, and they'll put out about like 5 new statuses on Facebook a day. So it's frequent, it's watched, and I asked a lot of questions about it because it's like, okay, social media people, what do they do? Do they sit on Facebook all day and like update their status once an hour and that's it? But it's actually an added responsibility that the reporters have to take on. They didn't hire new staff to like sit on the computer, but rather it's another thing they have to think about when contributing to the department. So if anyone has any questions regarding especially radio or how the department at NPR specifically has grown, feel free to ask.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Drew, and I'm a communications major. I'd like to start with a story. I don't know if any of you know, but yesterday Garrison Keillor was actually on campus, and I had the opportunity to talk to him just outside Sexton. And it was cool. I got to chat with him for 5 minutes, and his first question to me was, you're a comm major. Well, what's next for you? Mr. Keillor, the golden question. It's exciting, with my field, where journalism is headed, with the social media. Everybody's getting their news through Twitter and whatnot. And I'd like to see, maybe I can make a living running social media or doing that for a company. Go into the studies of how companies, organizations utilize social media in order to expand their reach. And he laughed at me. He said, I'm very glad that I lived in the time that I did. He said, journalism used to be kind of a gamble. He said it used to be kind of fun, living on the edge. He goes, and the reason it was like that is because journalists wrote to make a living. His idea of social media was that there's no money left in it. And it's clear after watching this video, newspapers are dying. So I guess to kind of start a conversation, the question that at least I ask myself about social media is it helping or is it inhibiting people's interaction with the news? It's definitely something that needs to be looked at because I guess a part of it, what if it's polarizing our civic engagement? only the feeds that you subscribe to are the Democratic feeds, or maybe only the Republican feed. So yeah, I just asked myself, I ask you now, is it shaping, excuse me, is it better for civic engagement now that new media is headed in the direction of social media, or is it worse? Yes.
I think we might try and cover television real quick and then open it up to general questions and comments just to sort of round out the various forms of media and then open it up to general questions. So Professor Miller has a clip of The Daily Show that I'll go and...
Actually, can I get you to cue it in just a minute? I want to set it up for just a second. Thank you. Yeah, we can't skip television, can we, in talking about political journalism? I'd mentioned CBS back in the 60s as having a reputation, and it continued on through the 80s, certainly, as being hard-hitting, serious journalistic coverage. It was well-earned, but the thing that you need to understand is while CBS had very good critical news reporting, they lost money at it, and they lost it constantly, but it was an acceptable business expense for them. What happened in the 1980s is that all three of the networks became incorporated into other corporate entities. So CBS was purchased by Westinghouse, for example. ABC was purchased by Capitol Hill's Disney. The result was that every part of that every part of the industry was expected to make money, news being no exception. And so the money available to do things like investigative reporting, which generally you lose money on, disappeared for the news industry in general and television as well. What we end up with today are the four major networks, adding Fox into the mix now, obviously. CNN as the dominant go-to site for news that sort of rivals Fox, and all sorts of other news shows rivaling for attention. And what I wanted to talk about was this idea of what counts as the news anymore. About 5 years ago, when people started doing polls of students your age and asking where they got their news from, academics were alarmed at this growing tendency because people were identifying The Daily Show, and then a couple years after that, The Colbert Report, as their source for news. And now, among your generation, The Colbert Report and The Daily Show are considered the primary sources of news. Now the question is that a good thing? Or is that a bad thing? Or is it maybe somewhere in the middle? So what I do is I have a clip from The Daily Show from last week, because they send a team, as you probably know, to the conventions. So this is a clip of covering the Republican National Convention. Now I chose this clip because it's dealing with a news issue. This is an issue that would normally be something that the mainstream news media would cover as well. So I guess, Drew, if you can play that.
Governor Romney has proudly touted his record in the private sector. But would a businessman president be good for America? We hit the convention floor to find out.
We've heard a lot this week about Mitt Romney's #1 qualification for president.
Mitt Romney turned businesses around in the private sector.
He's made a success of failing companies. America needs a turnaround, and the man for the job is Governor Mitt Romney.
And why is that?
I think government needs to run more like a business.
These aren't easy conversations to have, but if it's not working, you gotta end it. It's gotta go.
If a branch of Blimpies is failing, they don't reward it, they shut that down.
Exactly.
Always letting the market decide would be the best thing to do.
Oh, okay.
Wherever you are, Drew, if you can click on that third tab on the bottom. There you go. Yeah. Well, yeah, play that.
has proudly touted his record in the private sector. But would a businessman president be good for America? We hit the convention floor to find out.
We've heard a lot this week about Mitt Romney's #1 qualification for president.
Mitt Romney turned businesses around in the private sector. He's made a success of failing companies. America needs a turnaround, and the man for the job is Governor Mitt Romney.
And why is that?
I think government needs to run more like a business.
These aren't easy conversations to have, but if it's not working, you gotta end it. It's gotta go.
If a branch of Blimpies is failing, they don't reward it, they shut that down.
Exactly.
Always letting the market decide would be the best thing to do.
Oh, okay. And where are you from?
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Whoa! Whoa, dead last in per capita income. You are costing the federal government $20 billion. That is, you know what? I think we're going to have to let the market decide.
And if that's the case, we need to take a hard look at which divisions of AmeriCorp are succeeding and which are failing. Because what was that, Delaware?
If it's not working, you gotta end it. It's gotta go.
Exactly. So let's do this.
Let's talk about the bottom line. South Carolina is taking way more in government funding than it's paying back in tax.
Well, that's not good, is it?
No, you're in the red.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
We cut government expenses, maybe. Why don't we try that?
Oh, so you're blaming the boss?
Huh?
One operating division audited, 49 anxious states to go.
You nervous, Todd?
A little bit. It's kind of hot, though.
Yeah, because I see you sweating.
Yeah.
You anticipating bad news in this conversation?
No, not really.
Well, you're about to get some. Wisconsin is failing. You are taking in more than you're giving back.
That's what they say.
No, that's what I'm telling you. I'm looking at your numbers here. They're middling. I know you're Wyoming. No one really expects anything of you. What do you think? Yeah. Would you like a Gatorade, a towel or something?
No.
It seems like your whole face is crying. These conversations are never easy. Okay? Can be painful.
We've decided to let Georgia go.
Suddenly, when actually faced with the numbers, running America like a business didn't seem like a good idea after all. And it was every state for themselves.
You're really in the red, and we can't support you.
No. Iowa has a budget that shows up in the black.
Sir,
Why don't you talk to California?
Iowa is talking so much crap about you right now.
About my state?
Yes.
Who are we getting rid of?
I'd go with Maine.
All right. How do you think this year went?
Well, I don't think it went too well again.
No, it didn't go too well. Oh, Maine is terrible. You are taking in more than you're giving back.
I don't see anything wrong with that to help us get moving forward.
Explain to me, if we're running a business here, why we're keeping you around.
Can I talk about these hats right now?
AmeriCorp is clearly struggling. It was time to CEO up.
All right. You three are here because you are the worst three states in the union. So we're going to have a little contest, okay? First prize, you get to keep your job. Second prize, anyone want to see second prize? Second prize, Oak Ridge Boys CD.
Oh, yeah.
Third prize is your fire. You, Minnesota, where the hell should I keep you?
We have a land of 10,000 lakes.
You, go home and water ski. Wyoming, what do you got?
Least population in the union. Wide open spaces.
Yeah, who gives a go fly a kite? Mississippi, you think this is funny?
Yes.
You see this watch? This watch is worth more than your entire state.
We know what hard work is, and we're good at it. Then we grow cotton, and we're the most hospitable people that you'll ever want to meet.
I gotta be honest. First date's a piece of she is outselling you too. Take your CD. Get the out, you're fired.
Prepare yourself, America, because Romney always be closing.
We'll be right back.
Okay, so I want to draw your attention to a couple things that are going on in that clip. Aside from the obvious fact that it is entertaining and funny, there's a serious issue being tackled here. Right? What they've done is they are really raising the issue of whether or not it is a fair metaphor or analogy to talk about running the country like a business. That sort of question is something that is hard to find anymore in traditional journalism outlets. You'd be hard-pressed to find that discussion going on. On the other hand, though, I think you can raise some serious questions about the depth of that conversation, right? How much do you learn? How much of a point do they make? Second thing going on, though, is that The Daily Show makes no pretense at being journalism and thus makes no pretense at being objective, right? Instead of trying to separate out objective news facts from editorial content, they blend the two. And we know consistently, time and again, that's attractive to a lot of people. They like the fact that The Daily Show calls out politicians when they do stupid things, regardless of which party they're from. I don't want to take up a lot of time with Daily Show clips, but they're covering the DNC, and they have certainly found some things to mock the Democrats about as well. So one of the things I just wanted to throw out there when we start the general discussion is whether or not you think something like The Daily Show, something like the Colbert Report, or whatever those are going to morph into in the next several years, ought to be considered news. Whether we should celebrate that, whether we should despair of that, and where you think the future takes that.
Now, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll pass the mic around. Comments as well?
This comment, is this on? Okay. This comment's going towards more of the social media aspect, or in the internet news in general. I think that it's really given, I mean, you look at our traditional news sources, ABC, CBS, NBC, even CNN. I mean, I'm a conservative, and they're all, whether anybody likes it or not, they're all left-leaning. That's just how they are. Whether, how much or how little, we can argue about. But the internet really gives conservatives an equal voice in politics, especially Facebook and Twitter. I mean, blogging, all these different sources really give us an equal voice because it's not journalists feeding off journalists. It's real people talking about real issues down to the grassroots up to, famous people like Rush Limbaugh. It's everybody speaking their mind, and it allows people to sort through what they like, what they don't like, and you can find those people that you really resonate with and see what they think, and you can see the other side, but it really gives both sides an equal voice. I just wonder what you guys have to think about that.
Well, I don't think there's any debate that social media increases people's communication with each other, but I think that the question being asked is, ought this be considered news? And the key word there is news. What is news? And I think that there's a blurry line there where we're not really sure exactly if certain social media outlets or The Daily Show ought to be considered a serious news outlet. Is this something that should be actually considered a valid opinion, a valid point about the issues? And how I view it is, I see that it sells. It's clear that it sells, and it's clear that people are engaging with the issues more, and I think that it's lighthearted enough to get people laughing about it, and I think it makes talking about politics much more enjoyable. And for those reasons, I would say that this is valid news.
So I would agree with your contention, so to speak, that the Colbert Report and the Daily Show are valid news. I think, however, it's important to keep in mind that they're part of the process, the news process. I think that in this day and age, if I can use that term without being glared at, in this day and age, that if we take any medium of news, and treat that as our one-stop shop, there you go, that can create a problem because there's a lot of spin going on. I think Professor Miller, you addressed the issue of depth in the Daily Show and Colbert Report, and yeah, there's not much depth there, but there's a lot of breadth, if you will, and so I think that it's important to kind of address and understand that news has opened up, and we need to start looking at multiple places for that.
Sorry, I guess I'd just sort of like to address, what did you say your name was? Edward? Edward. I think we have this common debate that you'll hear all the time about the liberal news media and this and that, and I understand where you're coming from, and then we talk about going to the internet, and then you gotta look at who are our journalists, and what is the point of journalism, especially when the 4 biggest news companies are huge private conglomerates, and they do want to make money. Essentially, they're appealing to an audience. Fox News, we got Bill O'Reilly's the most popular show on cable television, the No Spin Zone. You know, people love this stuff. It's designed to draw people to it. So, like, really, who can we trust? And you can't trust anyone, I would say, except academics. But academics now is considered liberal. So, who do you listen to? How do you draw your opinions? I can't go read a journal article that's written by some political science professor every single day. That's extensive. I think the news media is sort of, at times, a little corrupt because we are having biased people. Everyone's always going to be biased. Everyone's always going to have an opinion. But I suppose it's almost, and I guess my point would be, and you guys could respond to this, when our news outlets center around making as most money as possible, they are going to try to appeal to people, period, or a group of people. Well, I don't mean you guys could respond to that. I'm sort of see what you think about that.
You all are raising the question of money because you cannot separate out in this day and age news, political journalism and news from profit. And what that does to the news is certainly open to debate and interpretation. I'll just say flat out, I don't in fact accept a liberal media bias at all. I think the media are generally quite conservative in that they are defending corporate interests. And the stories that choose to get covered, not get covered in editorial slant, is pretty consistently pro-corporate. And the corporations change and the interests change. But I wanted to raise a separate issue, which is this notion of who can you trust and where do you go? And that question is very much up in the air right now. If you're a student of politics, of journalism, it's a fascinating time to see what the social media in particular are going to end up looking like. The Facebook IPO debacle that's going on right now, right, where they're trading at less than half of what they opened at, is precisely a reflection of the fact that investors in corporate America do not know what to do with social media. They cannot trust them to make a profit. They're anxious about it. And that doesn't even touch on something like Twitter or Pinterest or those, where nobody knows what to do. If you watch, like I do, The Daily Show online, I'm peeved every time I have to watch a Dr. Pepper commercial one more time between every clip, right? So we're at a time right now where there's a struggle to figure out how to get profits generated out of these media. And until that model becomes solidified, I think it's anyone's guess as to what this would look like. But I'll defer to the people who are actually in the trenches right now with it.
Well, this doesn't really have to do with like the money aspect of it, but more the who can you trust kind of thing. As someone who is, potentially pursuing journalism, I think there is kind of a stigma that goes along with it. And I obviously don't have like a hard and fast answer, but it's just kind of something that I've been thinking about lately as like, if I become a journalist, am I seen by society as someone who like isn't trustworthy when really it should definitely be the opposite?
For anyone who listens to NPR, we have these things called member drives, and it's basically everyone on staff asking listeners for funds. And working in NPR, which prides itself on being a very unbiased, reliable news source, I can speak from experience. I've seen it in action that if you want news that's trustworthy, listen to NPR. But that wasn't just a pitch. I also want to say that I also want to talk about how we make sure we're unbiased. So when I did a story, when you do a news spot, which is one of those things, it's a news story that's like 50 seconds long, we would produce 2 of them, and we would take clips, audio clips from somebody on each side. And that's how we may remain unbiased, because we're getting both sides of the story out. In regards to funding, we rely almost completely on members giving us money. And I asked Kate about this, and we actually had another brown bag about how you know, if a company gives us a large amount of money and they have different political views than what NPR is representing, say, on a given day, I mean, is that something that the staff worries about? And it's a discussion that we had where I learned that the reason why NPR is supported and gets so much money is because people trust it, not because they're saying what they want to hear. So I think if you take that into consideration, the trust issue, it can also bring funds instead of just, you know, like listening to what you want to hear. So I think NPR is a good model for that. But if anyone wants to share thoughts on that, go ahead.
I agree. It was told to me once this summer in my internship, you know, the guy I worked for asked, "What's a brand?" And I couldn't give him a sure answer. I actually struggled for a few minutes to answer that. You know, what is it? You know, a symbol. It's what you think about of the company, whatnot. But he was very precise about it. He says a brand is your promise. Our brand is your promise, you know, what people can expect when they walk through the doors of our store. And the reason I think that NPR has succeeded is that their promise is to give unbiased news. I mean, sure, we can break into a debate of, you know, whether or not NPR is liberal, as it often gets labeled. But I guess we live in a very exciting time, and I guess how I see it is it's kind of survival of the fittest at the moment. Who can, you know, make these promises, keep them, get retweeted, get exposure? They will survive this. Purely because they will have the most exposure, and because I believe that people always write and interact with others. People are trying to make a living, and they have to. They have to find that, and I do believe that that's what's going to keep this rolling. Anybody else like to comment?
I just got one more comment. Going back what you're saying, I mean, obviously no reporter is going to bite the hand that feeds them. They're not going to trash talk their own company. I mean, that's just corporate loyalty. And I think, you know, each individual news source has its own bias, its own based on where it is and all these kinds of things. And I think the best thing about the internet is what I was trying to get at before, maybe I didn't do such a great job, is that it gives everybody every option. I mean, you look at like Drudge Report. They don't pick off the Fox, they don't just go down the Fox News page, they don't just go, they go everywhere all at the same time. They have articles from Yahoo, they have articles from MSN. And it gives you the best, all these different places, I mean, there's hundreds of them. They give you the best view of the current news right now from all angles instead of just, you know, I mean, it's easy to just keep refreshing Fox News or have it running in the background or whatever, you know, whatever you choose to watch. But I think the best thing about the internet and that all these news sources are finally getting figured out is that it gives them an opportunity to compete head-to-head for everyone across America versus the New York Times, which 100 years ago was distributed in New York City, and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, which was distributed in Minneapolis. And so it really gives all these news outlets a chance to fight for everybody across the world, across the globe, really.
Yeah, just a couple things I want to say here. First of all, there's a stigma attached to politics, I believe. And I hope and pray that some of you see that as well. And I think that perhaps some of the root of that stigma would be in that not everybody wants to listen to straight facts all day. That would be a little boring. And I think that in order to keep the public's interest, we need we need to have engaging topics, and not only engaging topics, but topics that are engaging in a fun manner. And so I think that you know, again, I'm going to go back to the balance thing where we have these different mediums and each of them plays a role. And yes, at times some of them play more of a role than others, and it creates problems. But you know, I still hold that. That's okay. And one of the other things that I'd like to address here is what we can do, as opposed to just philosophizing, so to speak, about the media. What can we actually do about it? You know, we can talk about it all day, and I think that is one form of doing something. But when it comes down to the issues, I'm sorry, Edward, was it? Yeah. What sources can you trust? What sources should be looked upon? How many sources should be looked upon? And lastly, the final thing that I want to say is simply that, you know, in ancient Greece, there was direct democracy, no? And the reason we don't have that today is because not all of us can be a politician. Not all of us can be politicians, excuse me. And I think that part of realizing that, or part of living that, is realizing that not everybody's going to sit down and examine all the facts all the time. That's what political science professors might do sometimes. However, I think that it's also important to realize that there's this balance that needs to be kept. And so I'd love to hear some other perspective on that, on what anybody else might think is a legitimate news source, or how much it should be weighed here and there. Thank you.
Forgive me for I can't remember, and I need some help here. What is, I believe it's Yemen that has the, I can't remember the news network for the Middle East that sort of tracked a lot of the Arab Spring and stuff. It's a government news network. Al Jazeera, sorry. And as far as I know, and I could be wrong again because I haven't studied it a lot, but it had it's pretty popular, it's pretty well respected, and that's a country that's sort of ran by an absolute monarchy, but pretty benevolent. Most of the people are happy with that, no unemployment, chief exports oil, so they're good in that way because they have good, they're able to produce goods. But, I mean, when we talk about the money in the news media, that's the issue with trying to appeal rather than trying to bring the news. That news network, on the other hand, has been a pretty successful government-run news network. Now, if you bring up the idea of talking about a government-run news network in America, we're going to think that if one group of people gain power in government, they're going to incorrectly influence that government. I mean, but I think, could it be a possible solution to have a truly sort of like elected news governance sort of board in America presenting news? If you could somehow avoid ill political influence, I know probably people that identify with the left wing will support that more with the right wing because people on the right wing are going to want less government and not trust things like that. But is that possible? I mean, when we talk about if it's in a democratic manner, a true democratic manner, where people are legitimately involved and people, and for example, can maybe, if it does go awry, to have a system set up where we can sort of break that mode if it does go astray. But like I said, if it's government, if it's not designed in the manner of making money, you can trust, in a sense, that it's not going to just be strictly for appeal. But then again, you think about countries like North Korea, which also have government news networks, which probably shouldn't be trusted. So, any comments?
I guess that with that, I mean, they even said that in the video, the accountability, that's what it's about. And there used to be a very small number of newspapers, and your accountability was whichever newspaper you would write for. Now, your accountability is based on who you interact with on the web. So the only way to get retweets, to get follows, to get people talking about you is to give something that people find trustworthy. I've heard it said before, I just got back from China, there's an ancient, I don't know if it's ancient, but a Chinese saying anyways that says, every scholar, excuse me, every field has its scholar, every field. So the Daily Report, they'd be a scholar, I would say, in their field, and that is kind of a lighthearted interaction with politics. That said, like you said, Al Jazeera, I would consider them a scholar as well, but they would be a more objective international news outlet. I think that I think that it's very exciting that we have these networks that are succeeding and moving on because they found kind of their niche, and I think that there's a market out there to be tapped, especially if you're looking to make money. And along with the accountability issue, a big issue in current events right now is the likes on Facebook. You can search, I need 5,000 likes on Facebook and Google, and the going price right now is $99.90. Is the deal I looked for my new media class. So you can pay for likes. They did a study, I'm not sure exactly what the percentage was, but a very high percentage of large companies' number of likes were fake, making it seem like people liked their products when they really didn't. Along with that, there's been studies done about Twitter followers. Celebrities, politicians, and things pay for up to 50, 60% of their followers. I mean, you see these astronomical numbers for followers, they're fake. You can pay for those. So none of our followers are fake, I promise. Yes. So anyways, Facebook addressed this. And Twitter's going to have to address this. And I think that it comes down to trust. I think it comes down to accountability. And that's how we're going to make money in this. I think that's where the market is headed, wherever you can find a legitimate source for your news, someone you can trust.
Well, yeah, and again, I think it's very important to point out that the reason why they're doing that, again, is to make money. So that becomes an issue, the money system.
It absolutely does, yes. People have families to feed, and yes. Would anyone else like to comment?
So, like, as I feel like the trustworthiness of news has gone down and stuff. So, like, how does that affect, like, the political aspect of the news? Do people rely on the news more now to make their political decisions, or do they, or like, because I feel like as the corporations have taken over more, like 45% of people think Congress should be like replaced entirely and stuff, so I don't feel like the news has a positive like aspect on politics right now. So do you kind of get the question there?
I'm sorry.
Okay, so if you're asking how much people rely on the news for their political decision making, it varies tremendously. Your age group, not very much, is what we know. The older you get and the more you start to worry about things like pensions and mortgages and the economic crisis, you start to read the news a little more and it influences you. And that's typical, right? It's to be expected. You don't have that time or that motivation. But that said, the 60s and 70s were the death knell of the relationship between the media and politics. Vietnam, followed quickly by Watergate, just killed American trust in politicians generally. And shortly thereafter, they got sick of the press. And so politicians and the press together are two of the most reviled social institutions in the country, right? Everyone hates them. I did want to make one comment. When you raised the question, what can we do? What do we do about this? Anybody can sit and lament about politicians and the media and blah, blah, blah. One thing at your disposal now is the ease with which you can get access to information at a level that even science fiction writers 10 years ago could not fathom, right? If you are watching The Daily Show and you hear some offhand reference to a political event you don't know about, you can, within minutes, seconds, pull it up on your phone and educate yourself. So if somebody's talking about a throwaway comment about Chuck Norris and 1,000 Years of Darkness and you're not sure what that has to do with politics, within 10 seconds you can know. So the ability is there. The question is whether you take advantage of it. And I'll pick an example that I think works irrespective of political difference, party affiliation right now. We live in an undisputed superpower. Right? There's really nobody internationally to rival us in terms of the authority and power we exert internationally, which means we have the advantage of not having to care or know about what goes on in the rest of the world. And we rely on the U.S. media outlets for most of our news about the rest of the world, which are notoriously bad at it. Right? I wouldn't ask for a show of hands, but how many of you read the BBC or watch Al Jazeera? Wow, okay, so cool. The more you can do that, the more you can expose yourself to viewpoints you might not like. If you are conservative, watch MSN or if you can or CNN, or if you can stomach it, MSNBC, right? Or watch Fox. But expose yourself to those alternate viewpoints, those alternate stories, because I do think a trend is going increasingly towards more partisan news and that blurring of the editorial news line. And it's really going to be up to you all as consumers, as readers, as citizens, to make sure that you are well informed. And that, like I said, is easier to do now than it's ever been.
Other thoughts or comments you want to make? Questions?
I think that's a very good point. And again, I think it's a very exciting time that we no longer rely on only the New York Times or only a big publication that you have to hold in your hands. Anybody can start a website and start their circulation, get retweets, get Facebook likes. And again, I think that it all comes down to accountability and trust. And I think that there are some very legitimate websites like PolitiFact and Fact Checker that are keeping politicians in check. Paul Ryan ran into this problem with his speech a little bit, and it was exciting to see on Facebook and Twitter everybody's interaction with that. Because not only are these news organizations, now these are your friends. Now it's easy to see, what your friend is reading, thinking, whatnot about these issues. Unless anybody would like the final words, I think we're going to wrap it up. 4:30. Would you like? Well, Tom Brokaw is coming on Tuesday. I'd like to encourage you all to attend that. And also we had our Facebook page up there. Again, all of our likes are real people that like to be involved with the news and with civic engagement, public policy. And I think that it's facilitating discussions like this in an informal manner that really make this school a special place to be. And I thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And I encourage you to come next week for our next talk in the series. So thank you very much. And
1 second. My name is Matt Lindstrom. I direct the McCarthy Center. Thank you all for being here. We have a very special gift for our guests. When you speak at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., they give you what they call a coveted mug. But we have a very coveted McCarthy Center Politics in a Pint glass that we give out to our guests every time. So whether it's water, Pepsi, or something else, it's all yours. So thank you very much for participating. And like Drew said, thanks to all of you for showing up. Do sign into our mailing list. We're trying to adhere to the email kind of instructions that we recently received to tone it down, which is very legit. So we're going to try to tone down the emails and kind of target our networking, our outreach. So the last thing I just wanted to put a quick plug into our upcoming events. Obviously the Brokaw piece next week, but also you're going to find out some information about our mentor program through the McCarthy Center. We have about 40 alums and other professionals that have volunteered their time to serve you all, regardless of your interests too. It's across a variety of professions, including the variety of business, community, industries, journalism, and across really the career spectrum. So check it out, pay attention. The other reason you might want to check us out on Facebook is various job postings. Just today we posted a couple job postings, and this also kicks out to our Twitter feed, which is @EugeneJ McCarthy is the what do you call it, tagline, or so hashtag. He's one of our bosses on this thing. Anyway, that's about it. So folks might stick around for a bit, but cheers and thanks for coming out.